everybody back to Segal Talks here at the Martin Lee Segal Theater Center at the Graduate Center CUNY in Midtown Manhattan, where we having a few nice fall days, almost summer days. High summer days might even be in Germany, where our guest today is from Florian Malzacher. And again, we are in the middle of things. Corona numbers around the world are shooting up, and this situation in America also, we all feel, is heating up. Nobody really knows what will happen. It's times of uncertainty, at times where there seems to be possibilities of violence, notes and suggestion that senators might be kidnapped, that parliaments would be stormed by militias, something unheard of, could not even have been thought, we think, before, but we will see where this all will be going. There's an election soon, and I think the smoke signs point towards change, and there's just so much chaos also America can take, and we hope this will be on the right side of history, on the right side of the fight for freedom and liberties and free speech. And this is what artists always have been. They have been on this side. They anticipated what is happening in the future, and also found ways to make us comfortable with this, to think, to help us imagine the present and the future in a way that is liberating and also close to the truth. And the truth is concept, and Florian Malzacher, in one of his festivals, the truth is concrete after all. So with us really is an important thinker, I feel, of contemporary theater. Florian is an independent performing arts curator, and I'm reading a bit from his bio, a dramaturge, and I would also stress that word that is of significance, a dramaturge and curator and a writer, and this can all be combined. He was the artistic director of the Impulse Theater Festival in Germany, a co-programmer of the significant steirischer Herbst in Austria, and he curated numerous events, the 170-hour marathon camp Truth is Concrete, on artistic strategies in politics, very early, 2012. Also, I think in Moscow, he did one on artistic expression and freedom of speech. He also co-edited books on really significant, great companies we look up to: Forced Entertainment, Rimini Protokoll, and that's just came out. That's, I think, when we last saw each other, for the Nature Theater of Oklahoma, the great New York company and ensemble that also, should be much more in the center of talks than it is in the Americas, at least here. His publications are looking for a political theater of today, empty stages, crowded flats, Performativity as Curatorial Strategy, and the new one, which we're going to talk about now. It just came out. I think it was presented a couple of weeks ago. Gesellschaftsspiele, the idea of games and society. To put this into a perspective, what is political theater today? So Florian, really thank you for taking the time. Where are you? What time is it?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, well, it's 6 o'clock in the evening in Berlin now, so it's getting dark, and it was not. We didn't have a nice fall day. It was raining all day, so.
Yeah, and it gets dark early, right? It gets late early, as someone said about baseball, Yogi Berra, in some innings. So how is it in Berlin? Before we come to your book, what's going on in theater performance?
Well, I mean, the theater reopened more or less just recently, and now it's a bit uncertain what will happen in the next weeks. So and of course we have, if you go to a theater, it's very limited numbers. Seats have to be free. If there's not a classical setup, if you move around, it's really very complicated. I just was in Vienna last week, and they had a performance which I didn't join, but they told me in the whole performance only 10 people could take part. So at a certain moment, so theaters, I think a lot of the smaller, I'm more interested in the smaller theaters, of the smaller production houses and theaters, that they will try to keep going in a way, sometimes almost in a symbolic level, like just to stay open and to see what is possible or not. And how long it will be possible, we'll see. And now it's like everywhere, also Germany, inside Germany, it's very different, but in Switzerland and Austria, then even, you know, what are the rules? Do you have to wear a mask inside or not? How much distance do you have to have, and so on? But I must be, to be honest, I've only been into a theater space twice since March. So, and I'm planning to go tomorrow. So I don't have too much insight of it. So that's what I hear.
What did you see? What did you see?
I went to see at Wiener Festwochen, the festival in Vienna, that they did a small program in this short moment where they could do something recently, and I saw new works by Boris Nikitin, a Swiss theater director who really does very interesting work, and so I went there to see his show and talk to him. Mm-hmm. This was one of the few. So it was possible to travel to Vienna and to Zurich, which is now already not really possible anymore, or at least strongly advised not to do. So it was a short moment. We had a month or 2 months maybe where some things were possible, and now we will see.
Mm-hmm. So your book, it came out yet now in 2020. I mean, you talk about theater up to 2019. It's one of the most recent books I have seen that really talks about theater of the present, of the moment. And in it, before Corona, I think everything was done, but you made clear the sand is shifting. The time is out of joint. New rules and new games in a way, or new ideas are needed. So tell us a bit, what was the idea to write this book? You did one before also for the Alexander Verlag, who's the publisher of it, about theater and the political. What made you write the book?
Well, I think on one hand, it was a kind of a personal thing that, I mean, I edited several books also on the topic of politics and art and politics and theater and activism and so on. But to actually sit down and write through it myself, not just collecting and writing a little bit around it, but like to really, like, I mean, maybe kind of not really sum up, but to see where we are after, I don't know, almost 10 years of, I think, a big change in terms of relations also of arts and politics and theater and politics. And also I had the feeling that, yeah, I mean, there are certain things that are kind of discussed, but not on a broader level. So I also wanted to write a book which is not too academic. I'm not an academic. I'm a curator after all, and a dramaturge, to also enable a bigger conversation. In this case, in Germany, because it's written in German, also with an interested audience in what can be political about theater today. And there's still, I had the feeling there's still prevailing a lot of ideas that are, for me, not only a bit too old-fashioned or conservative, but also actually not really interesting for theater. I think that theater as a medium has certain possibilities to try out society in certain ways that other mediums don't have, and that often there's not enough focus on this, and you have other things like storytelling and narrations and political analysis and whatever, which is maybe nice to have, but that's not so unique to theater. So I also wanted to have a look at what I believe that is really in the core of the possibilities of theater.
Yeah, I think you call many artists as your witnesses, talk a lot about this, but it also is not just written out of the stomach, out of the emotional moment of a review, but really I think you have almost like a theory put together that after a post-traumatic moment in theater where this was clearly handbook, there is something forming, I think, also nationally, globally, and I think your work is part of it. Tell us a little bit. You say older ideas on theater and politics no longer work. What is working? What do you think? What should we pay attention to?
Well, one thing is, I think, actually very simple, and everybody knows it, but still it's complicated to do, I guess, is that I believe that the political in theater cannot only be in the content. I think it needs to be in the content, but it also needs to be in the form. And I think historically, you can say, I mean, ignoring a lot of exceptions, of course, you can say there was a strong focus, for example, on the content, on the political content in the, let's say, directors' theaters of the 70s and 80s. It was very much about representing miseries in the world and political situations and so on. But the form of it was very conventional. It was representative theater in a way. I mean, a lot of the details, aesthetics were, I mean, they were great directors, but in terms of political understanding, it was a representational setup in a way. And then you could say like post-dramatic forms and conceptual dance from the 90s and in the zeros, were then in kind of in reaction to that, putting a big focus on form. So the post-dramatic theater is very much searched for theater, for the political in the form. And which was great, and I think an important step. But now I think it's important to see that actually the most interesting political moments in theater can happen if you consider both aspects of it. So also with form, I mean, what is the relationship to the audience? So how do you, what is the, there's the famous Brecht sentence that when he writes about Stanislavski and others, that he says, but the situation on stage is shown as not changeable by the people in the audience. So, and the audience, of course, representing the people, and the stage then representing the order of society. And this is, I think, still often not taken in account. If you want to be political also in your artistic work, you of course need to also think, what is the relation you create in reality while you talk about it? And this is maybe one of the aspects that I wanted to stress. And this under the, again, in a very specific medium, which I think, well, theater has this strange capability, or you can say paradox, that it really creates situations that are true and fictional at the same moment, that you can be inside and observe from the outside of the same moment. This is very unique to theater. You have it even in the most classic theater. Somebody says, I'm Hamlet, and okay, I'm willing to believe you, but at the same time, I know you're actor X epsilon, and you represent this role. And this shifting plays a role in theater. This has, I think, a strong political possibility also to really not only look at things that are represented, be part of it, understand that they're real also in the moment they are performed, but at the same time being able to step out and look at it and analyze it, or see the utopian or fictional potential of it. So this is a bit abstract now, but I think these are the two moments that I really think are very unique to theater, and often not, let's say, not used enough in the works we see on stage.
Yeah. I think that comes out very clear in your work. You say how you do it is of importance, not just what you do. Normally you would say, well, it's a play about children at war in Africa. It's about capitalist exploration in early industrialization in England, or mistreatment of minorities, when you have shame and guilt, fear, anger as reactions from the audience. But if you look at it, how it is produced, it is one genius director who's in the hierarchy there. Actors are hired and fired. Theaters, especially in the US, often are privately owned. They are made to make money. They are part of a system. They actually represent the system. We show you the very best, and that's why you have to pay prices of $150, $200, sometimes $300 because they are the best actors. And if you, as the worker, and Claire Bishop also wrote about this, that model of the artist who has to struggle and is not paid and has no insurance is even used in this neo-capitalistic society for everybody who is struggling as a food delivery on a bicycle. Say, this is what artists do. Maybe one day you will win also an Oscar because they made it. This big lie, as Hannah Arendt said, the Fata Morgana of that American dream that is no longer there. And I think to say how you do it and what does it represent as a system is something very, very, very significant. And I think you really put your finger on that. I mean, René Polish, the Berlin director and writer, says he distributes the text and actors choose it with him. He said, if I write the main role and secondary role, I just represent everything, what I'm against. You also quote him other things. What do you feel? What are examples of theater where you say, since after all, it is concrete, and as you said, theater is real for that moment, but it's also utopian, or it's imaginary, but it is real for that moment. What are artists where you feel this represents really clearly this kind of new way of presenting work?
Well, first of all, I would say there's not one way. So actually, I think there's quite a huge variety of artistic practices that I try to show. So I think there's not one answer to it. There are works that go further into the idea really of creating assemblies, of really creating political moments in terms of also negotiating the role of the audience and how we imagine society together. So there are artists like the Dutch actually visual artist Jonas Staal, who with his New World Summits kind of creates alternative parliaments in which people are speaking that are usually excluded from democratic discourse in a very radical way. So there usually people are speaking that are considered to be terrorists in some states, and of course in others not. In others they are freedom fighters. So there's also this discrepancy. But basically you could say, yes, it's in a way it's a real parliament. It feels like a real parliament, but of course it doesn't have any power. But the people in there that are speaking are not actors. It's really representatives of different organizations. And you as an audience have to negotiate all the time, like how do you feel about this? How do you relate to it? And there's not one consensus presented. It's often opinions that are quite contradictory to each other. Milo Rau also created some of these parliaments. So there's a whole strand of people and artists that work with the idea of assemblies, which I find a really very potent and very important aspect of what political theater can be today. But of course, it's one direction. On the other hand, you can say there are also artists that maybe in a way use the stage in a more conventional way. They still use the stage and an audience that watches it, but shift something which maybe shifts the whole imaginary. There's work which probably sounds a little bit remote or strange, even from a US American perspective, which has a completely different discourse around it. But in Munich, a young black theater maker, Antelina Recke, took an existing play with a white ensemble, basically a white German ensemble, and took exactly the same play and replaced the actors with black actors. So nothing was changed. All the timing, all the set, everything was done. It was happening on exactly the same stage, just with black actors, which for German context was really, it created a huge discussion in the feuilletons and quite strange discussions partly also. It was a very conceptual idea, maybe a work of appropriation art, you could say, to a degree. But it produced really, quite an important discussion in Germany that was not existing in this way so far. So this is a completely different way. So
yeah, black copy, right? And they didn't, of course, have any black actors. And as you write in the book, the white body seems to be neutral, carte blanche. You can interview a black body on stage. All of a sudden is loaded. Even so, if I understand right, every movement, every gesture, every detail of the set design of lighting was copied from something was done by white artists for the white audience, with them in mind, actually written for them because they don't know anything else. It's kind of a brilliant idea, actually, a conceptual idea.
Yeah, it is, and it's on so many levels, because of course it also raised the question of who is in the ensemble in this theater. So actually the Münchner Kammerspiele under the directorship of Matthias Lilienthal were quite diverse ensemble compared to others. But still there was not a single black actor, so it was all guests. Everything performing there had to be a guest, because there was no one in the ensemble who could be part of it. So it was also work of institutional critique, you could say. But it of course tested also how we imagine, I mean, as Germans in this case, in front of a very German audience, how we imagine German society. And all the actors were German-born actors also on stage, so it's and it represented a completely different image. I mean, it's a very simple idea, but it was very powerful, especially I think in a German-speaking context, where certain discussions are maybe less advanced, but also a bit less heated than in the US, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to that question also of identity, politics. You quote Akhil Mbebe, who said, the real question is not what unites us, what normally was also part of a political movement, whether it was feminism or ecological movement. The real question is, how can we connect to what is not us, or include or be open and understand it. What do you feel? What is that new theater that you are noticing, what you're writing about? How is it dealing with these identity politics, which is a very big question here in the States?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question here as well, but of course the discourse is slightly different, I guess. And often it's also a problem that discourse is maybe sometimes taking too much one-to-one from an Anglo-American context to, for example, a German context where certain situations are different. But of course, it's an important question, and and a lot of works deal with it and try to figure things out. And it relates again to what we were talking before. Also, when you were talking, for example, about Polish, the questions like, what can we represent on stage also? So who can represent whom? So this discussion
who is allowed to represent whom?
Who is allowed to represent whom? Who is not represented at all, etc. So this, of course, is a question. I mean, it's in the core of theater. That, like this is the one-to-one the questions that theater has to ask itself at the same time. And post-dramatic theater was discussing this for a long time from a different angle, from a different philosophical or theoretical angle maybe. But the question, who can play whom, and what do you do when you represent, for example, certain role models, was in theater always an important question. And in the last 20, 30 years, it was with post-dramatic theater discussed again from a different angle, I would say. So when Polish, for example, says, yeah, but if you repeat playing Ophelia over centuries, maybe this model of a woman only exists because of this continuous representation in theater. Even you might represent it with a critical attitude, but still you reproduce it every time. And that, of course, goes into other questions of representation around identity politics, etc. So I think it's a very important question, and it's not a question where there will be an easy or fast answer to it for theater, because in the end you also have to, like the question of representation for theater means, so what can you then represent as a performer, as an actor? Can you represent at all somebody else? Can you, or can you basically only represent yourself on stage, which is a discussion we had before, but now it gets politically more loaded, I think, in recent years, and especially again in recent months.
Yeah, and I think you also very convincingly argue that it is time to take the how into consideration. You said often also easy participation is a placebo. You make people believe they participate. Meanwhile, they really don't have anything to say how the play goes now. It's all pre-thought, and that this is not really just about a formal inventions, but there has to be a change. You say, going back to medieval times, you say it was clear the king was the king, but he also was a body, he was a representation of power. So, he presented both, the king is dead, but long live the king, he would be the internal representation of an existing society. Then perhaps with Louis XIV and the French 17th century, he said, l'état c'est moi, he was king and the person and God almost in one way. But the idea of democracy it is not represented by one person. It is not embodied. It is not a Trump-like figure. Actually, it's a diversity. It's a multi-directional, as you say, representation. And you cannot represent it. It's impossible to represent, that, but you cannot not represent also. Exactly. And in that, as you wrote, in that kind of electricity that between these things, there is a big chance, and that, as Brecht told us, it's just a symbolic representation on stage. We should not and no longer represent ways of thinking that perhaps are not reflecting the very basic idea of democracy.
Yeah, there's always, Brecht in a way said it in his way, there's always a gap. You have always to see the gap between the representation and what is represented. And for me, I mean, not being a political theorist, it's really quite astonishing how these questions of political theory are mirrored in theater as questions about representation. And I think the answer is, as you said, we cannot and we cannot not represent and use representation is the same in politics, and this is a struggle. Also, why I think that there's but we maybe are more aware now than before, or many of us are, that there's not a solution for it. So it's always this question about representation will never be solved. So as other questions will never be solved. So when Derrida talks about the coming democracy, so democracy is always to come and never there. So there will never be the moment when it arrived, in a way. And this goes, I think that there will never be one solution is also something that where theater is a perfect place, a perfect medium to deal with. So yeah, so I write, for me, the concept of Chantal Mouffe of agonistic pluralism is for theater really very productive, because
can you go in this? She is perhaps not as well known, and this is, I think, a central argument, and also something what you took for the theater. Can you talk about her idea and what it means for you? That really it's central, I think, to your book.
Well, to simplify it a lot, she basically.
We have time. We have some time.
No, but it's also okay to simplify. I'm not a theorist, so I can simplify. I'm allowed to simplify. But what she basically says is like a lot of she and Ernesto Laclau, who developed this theory, that eventually a lot of also leftist theorists always believed that in the future there would be a moment where we could reach consensus. So in a way, Marx did with communism, that would maybe arrive one day. Even Habermas and others, Rawls or whatever, have in a way an idea that there could be a consensus. So if we evolve enough, if we learn enough, if we become better human beings, better societies, we could agree. And what Mouffe basically says, that's nice. I mean, we all would love it, but it will never happen. It's just not in the human DNA, if you wish. First of all, it's not in the human DNA, but also there's not only one solution to things. There will be several solutions. So what happens when we kind of push the idea that there should be a consensus on everything, like also in Germany for many years, Angela Merkel was kind of representing this idea of that everything, that there's a common sense, there's no alternative. The sentence that Maggie Thatcher already used is also a sentence that Angela Merkel likes. So if there's no alternative, you basically just push other ideas outside. So they don't go away. People that don't believe in it, they might shut up, but they don't go away. So what democracy in the end needs to be is to provide a place where differences can be acted out, where also struggles can be acted out. That's what democracy is. And what she basically says, she uses these two terms of, she uses the term of agonism, agonistic pluralism, which comes from the Greek agon, the competition of arguments in the Greek tragedy is called an agon. So it
comes out of theater vocabulary, actually.
Yeah, theater and sports vocabulary, which was close at that time in a way. So we need to have a space where this competition of arguments can happen. If we don't have an agonistic space, we eventually will get an antagonistic space, a space where basically these opinions are so far apart and so strongly divided that there's no way of even keeping them in one room, not agreeing, that she doesn't want, but not even being able to have this exchange anymore. One could, of course, look at the US and think that looks like maybe a little bit like what she meant. So she says, yeah, eventually their civil war is the only thing coming out of it. So democracy needs to provide an agonistic space, and we need to accept that there are other opinions, which doesn't mean anything goes. So there's also negotiation of the limits of these other opinions. But if we only believe in the consensus, this will not work. And theater, I guess, for me, was always a medium where conflicts are represented, from the Greek tragedy to Shakespeare. Even in psychological drama, you could say the conflict is maybe within one person or within one body or one mind, but still it's about representing conflicts or enabling conflicts in the theatrical space. So it's very much in the concept of theater, and this is something where I think some examples showed it, that in theater still it was possible, for example, to have an agonistic space where outside maybe it was already impossible. Milo Rau did an interesting work several years ago, the Moscow trials, where he not reenacted, but he repeated in a way 3 important trials against art in Moscow in the
Trials that actually
2000s.
never happened. They should have happened, but they were sent to jail. He said, we need the trial.
Yeah, so there were, yeah, they were not, there was never a fair trial to those.
Yeah.
So 2 were like censored exhibitions where artists went to prison, and the 3rd one is the famous Pussy Riot trial after their performance in the church. And he kind of in 3 days invited very different members of society, of the Russian society, really from far right-wing TV moderators, Cossacks, etc., religious activists, Orthodox activists, to artists, curators, human rights activists, and so on, in one space. And the rules of the game were the ones of a trial. So there was a judge, there was lawyers, there was a attorney general, etc. There was a jury, and in 3 days, a discussion about Russia and the freedom of art and religion was happening in Sakharov Center in Moscow, which outside of this space, I think at that time already wouldn't have been possible anymore in Moscow. So this was maybe a good example for where art really can provide a space to maybe have the utopia or the nostalgia of that it's still possible to at least have this opinion in one space.
Yeah. No, I think it is quite a convincing thought, idea, or contribution to what we should be doing now, what we should be thinking about, that this idea of, in a way, of a competition, but a fair one, and that it does not just happen in sports. Even so, it comes out, I think, of the Olympic spirit. I think this Argon was a daemon or a spirit who manifested it during the Olympic Games. He was if I read right, the brother of Nike, the victory. So he was, it was essential, and it was more important perhaps to lose in an agonistic conflict to a great opponent, than to cheat or to as you said, to demonize and not taking serious the arguments of the others. And I think the radicalization in the US, where Republicans and Democrats are almost like the Yankees fan and Red Sox fan in baseball, or Bayern Munich and Hertha. I don't know. So what would you say? People who do not, it doesn't really matter. You want to win. You can use every dirty trick. You just have, this is not the idea. It's not something that is convincing, and that this agonistic idea that also, if I remember right from your book, that term of the antagonists in a play, where you have the one this and one wins, like there's the battle with Achilles and Hector, one wins. And that this is not the idea, that in agonistic there is a plurality of voices, perhaps with the knowing that it will never be over the fight, but for a moment, maybe someone has the better cards or the better arguments, and also what is necessary. At the moment you write, it is no longer important in theater to show what's wrong with the world. It is important to show what could work and what works. It's a radical difference. It's a radical difference.
And I think this is really important politically, but also for art. As you say, I mean, I'm speaking mainly from a Western European context. So of course it's different in different contexts, but often I had the feeling like, I mean, yeah, as you described, there are different opinions, there are different positions in this, but it's a fight. So it's not cozy. It's not saying let's stay in a room and everybody has right and whatever. It's about fighting to win, knowing that there will never be you will never win, at least not forever, but you have to fight for your ideas. And very often it's a bit like, yes, we it's a bit within the bubble. So we know we are right, but why don't we? So we are busy with criticizing the others or showing what they do wrong, and sometimes forget maybe to rather formulate what is our project in it. And Chantal Mouffe very much draws from Gramsci, who described these cultural hegemonies, like that it's a hegemonic. It's about fighting for cultural hegemony, and for this you need to want to win. So you need to argue why not only say the other is wrong, but what is actually what you have to offer. I mean, and this we all have our own political examples, I guess, for that, and also in the US in the presidential election. So which were the candidates that offered something else, or which are the ones are just saying like the others are bad? So we need to we cannot just say we are on the right side. We need to fight this fight, and that's what that means. Is in every context very different. So also that's maybe also important to say. What works in Berlin now probably doesn't work in New York, and definitely probably doesn't work in I don't know in Congo or in Argentina or whatever. So every context needs different tools or adjustments of the strategies. There's not one possibility, also not artistically, where you can say like, oh, now we have a model of theater that's perfect, that will work for the next 10 years in every city in the world. It won't. No, it might not work next month anymore. Something we just noticed in our own lives, and it also might already not work 100 kilometers from where we are. So it's also about specific what this agonistic field can be or should be in a specific context.
Mm-hmm. But you have created festivals. Of course, you go as a professional. So many others. Well, how is the audience reaction? Is it often is used the audience wasn't ready yet, in avant-garde, which is also true. The audience won't understand, or they like it. How do you feel? What are the, in Europe at least, what are the reactions of audiences to these different, radically different approaches to theater?
I think it is like it was in the last 20, 30 years with a lot of post-dramatic theater, that I often think it's less about, I mean, there are things that are complicated, and there are situations where an audience also has to work for something, which is totally fine. But I think very often it's the bigger problem is not that it's complicated, but that you have a wrong perception of what you will enter in. So if you enter a play and wait for the king and no king comes, you will be disappointed. So no way you can get, if you come and just see, and that's maybe the also in terms of the analogy of the games. If you come and see, okay, what are the rules of this game? Where am I? What are the rules that are proposed? How are they played? And are they played well? I mean, you can also disagree. Do I agree with the rules? I don't have to agree with them, but to understand what are the rules of the specific game that is proposed is, I think, a good way to enter art or theater, maybe especially. And then you can still say, okay, that's not my game, or I think it's stupid, or I hate it, or whatever, or it's very badly played, which happens. but you, I guess, with a lot of work, if there's an openness towards it, it's not that complicated usually. Like also with the example I brought, when you're in there, it's not complicated to figure out what's going on. You might not want it, which is also fine, but it's not complicated.
So it's important to shape the expectation that it's very clear you're not going to see. You're not going to see a rock concert and although it's a classical chamber ensemble, or the other way around, so you know what you come in. And Lehmann always says, we have said it many times, theater is a house and it has many, many rooms. I think definitely this is the new addition in a way to the participatory one. Also the idea of the documentary in a way, also what Milo Rau did in a way, it's kind of a documentary theater of the real with a twist, what Carol Martin talks about. And I think there is something to that idea of the game, or agon, if I understand right, also means assembly. It has the idea of competition, a little bit of a game-like competition, but still, you prove your forces, your arguments, but it's also assembly. It also means, as you said in the very beginning of the word, coming together, which is part of theater. It's just the fact that you say, meet up as friends, and we go there, then you talk about what you saw, and then you have dinner, and you understand a little bit more perhaps about the life, or you liked it or you didn't like it. Like a game, you go, like a soccer game or football game, you might not like all the games, they're not all great games, but you still watch it. And so your idea, I would like to hear more, and maybe also it's something to look further on in your writing. I think the idea of game that you look at theater as a, if I understand right, as a game. So you talk about rules of the games and understanding. So tell a bit more what you feel could be different if it made clear that it's a game. Do you think there are played games what we see on stage?
No, I think more the game is the situation we enter, not on stage, but the whole situation, the coming together, the temporary community we are. What are the rules of this game where we enter as an audience, even when the lights go out and we have to shut up and watch the stage? So what is what rules are proposed, and if it's and how do they, what possibilities do they offer? I mean, Nora Sternfeld, Austrian curator, she likes to say, like, but it becomes interesting when it's not only played with the rules, but it's but the rules themselves are at stake. You can play with the rules, or maybe also, so which is a daring concept for theater. I don't know, like, do we want, for example, how much freedom do we want when we propose a democratic space? Is it democratic enough that the evening could go completely somewhere else, or do we say, which I'm not saying that's necessarily good. It's something we need to also negotiate. So what are the rules we create for the evening, and what is what is the audience or the participants or the guests or whatever they might be, what are they invited to participate in? And it relates to when you mentioned Hansis Lehmann with the post-traumatic theater, which he of course already often mentioned, we cannot forget the real situation we are in. So there might be a fictional situation, or I guess there, to a degree, there always is in theater, even if it's sometimes a very thin or very fragile fiction. But we can never forget the real situation we are also in. So for a certain time, together with other human beings, we are supposed to behave in a certain way. And this needs to be part of when we are invited to play along in a way, or to take part in it. Which doesn't mean that I think that it's always necessary that everybody is allowed to do everything. It's about negotiating these roles. It's can be totally fine to shut up and sit in your seats and watch something on stage, if that makes sense in the context of the proposed game.
Mm. No, it's I think it's really something to think about, to give a definition of it, that in a competitive representation of ideas on stage. I think Michael Frayn, the great British playwright, once was at the Segal, he said, in a great play, everybody is right, as everybody says, and you don't weaken. Otherwise, people have their own opinion, and then the audience member also, makes up their minds and change the idea of that it is actually clear to everybody it's a game, but you are part of it, and there are rules of the game, but they're also visible, if I understand right, or they are on the line, as you say, they are at stake. And this is something truly new. And I feel with this theater of a Rimini Protokoll or Susanna Kennedy, or the Latour, Frédéric Aitui, and works, what they do, Philippe Quesnay, you feel the rule, they are putting the rules out there. So what's going on? It's an uncertainty or uneasiness also, as you talk about. I think Fassbinder, at the end of his work, he didn't want to be called director anymore. He said Spielleiter, which is an old word in German theater, the direct, like a leader of a game. And that is maybe something to think about, that it could be the artists or leaders of games in a society that needs games, and they are not just commercial Yankees football, Bayern Munich winning 1-2 with sponsors. Games that also compete. There are ideas out there, and audiences are asked to make up their minds. It's something radically different and better.
There's an example of work that I quite like. I mean, it's very specific, and I don't say all theater should be like this, but as a setup to really figure this out, I found it really challenging and inspiring. It's by a Dutch theater maker Lotte Vandenberg, and she had this project called Building Conversation. And what she basically did over the last years is she said, okay, for her, I mean, in her definition, if you would strip everything away from theater that is not essential, it's nice to have or great or whatever, but it's not essential. At the end, there would be a conversation between people following certain rules. So that's basically her definition in a nutshell. And she said, like, okay, let's try this. And what she did, she took conversations from different conversation models from different parts of the world and different concepts behind it. Like the Jesuits have a certain way of conversing when they debate something. She took a model from Niels Bohr, the quantum physicist, who wanted to develop a model for collective creative intelligence and so on. So she took very different models and took more and more in. And what you would do, basically, you would arrive in the evening, you buy for one of these shows or whatever it is, you buy a ticket. So you buy, for example, a conversation without words. And then you go there, you have your ticket, and then you're brought to a certain place. You're, I don't know, 15 people or something, 15, 20 people. And somebody might, depending on what conversation you have, somebody might moderate it, maybe not. You explain the rules of this conversation, and then you're left alone. There's no performer. There's just the audience, which then becomes the performer. So basically, and sometimes you discuss what topic you want to discuss. Sometimes there is a topic. Sometimes there's maybe a time frame. Sometimes maybe you in the beginning discuss how long it should last. And then you're there. So then you're supposed to have a conversation. And it's quite an interesting situation, because you think, like, first of all, you think also about your own responsibility. Maybe you think it's stupid. I really didn't pay for this. I don't like it. So maybe I want to leave. But there are only 15 people in the room. So it's like, if I leave, it's maybe not fair. Should I stay, or let's wait for a moment? Then who starts a conversation? Who says something? You might not want, but then you feel like, maybe I'm also responsible for this evening to function. So there's a negotiation also about the responsibility of it. And then you have this double moment, which I mentioned before, that you really have a situation where you're inside and outside of a situation. So because it's called theater, and you bought this ticket, you probably also will think like, oh, how does it work? Why are certain people speaking more than others? Why do I speak this way? How do people argue or whatever? You kind of like are part of the performance, but you at the same time, you look at it and try to understand it. And this is, I think, as an experiment or as a model, really a very interesting work. And actually, because you asked, like, how does audience react to the ones I saw, some people were in there that really thought, I think in the beginning, they would buy a ticket for a real show. But they were actually, the ones that went into it often were the most enthusiastic afterwards, because they had a completely different experience and also a way of feeling of being part of it than others. Others, of course, thought that's bullshit and maybe tried to get out or stayed there, but you're a bit trapped in this. You cannot easily get out, which it's not always a nice situation that theater needs to produce. But I find it really a very productive example.
A brilliant ensemble. And I think, I don't know if you mentioned in your book, or the silent conversation is an Inuit, right, tradition. So there are very different ways, I mean, there is in America also audience feedback rules, developed, by dancers who felt it was so wrong how audience often reacts. So there are rules of conversations, and as you say, the shakers or the others, everybody has different ones. Interesting to pull it out, and it's a democratic art in that sense. It is something where the audience members are in charge in a way. They are the director, they are the writer, they are participating in it. And this is what of significance. And what we have lost is the idea that democracy is a participatory, in one could say, in your idea, game, a participatory enterprise, and that theater has to also try to get back to that truth. And maybe that's the most important: get engaged, do something, and where the activism then later also comes in. And I think this is something we have a responsibility, perhaps, to get people out of the idea to be a consumer. We say, well, what did he, like in a supermarket, you have 20 felt pens. Which one should I take? Which play do I go to? Which candidate do I have? What did he or she say yesterday? Participate in democracy, take time. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I totally agree. But also and at the same time, it's of course, like in this work, but also in democracy, not complete freedom. So there are rules. So there are rules proposed, and you can, I mean, you can decide not to obey them, but maybe the others want to obey them. And you have to negotiate why you would change the rules. But the rules are very tangible, and I think maybe that's one of the most important things. It's not that everything should be possible or everybody needs to have all rights in a performance all the time. It's about being able to understand the rules and to accept them and deal with them. So it's not about manipulation. I think I'm not a big fan of manipulation in theater. So it's because I think it's obscuring the rules, and it's at least in political theater, I'm not a fan of manipulation. Let's say, which I might enjoy when I watch a Hollywood movie. I don't enjoy it if it's supposed to be a political situation that is created. That's a contradiction for me. That is that is often not very clearly understood.
Yeah, it's true. I think even when these first Europeans arrived on the Mayflower on that ship, they had a little moment of revolt and didn't know what to do. And before they left the ship, they agreed to rules in that new world, and some say that was actually the predecessor to the American Constitution. Very interesting ones, also to listen, to respect, because now they went to a territory that perhaps was no longer protected, because they landed much more east. They wanted to be at the Hudson, but they landed in Plymouth. They were no longer English also territory. It was not, granted as a right, and they had to come up with something. And I think this idea of responsible participatory communication, and that theater and performance is a space for this, is something significant. And one could argue that great directors like the Peter Steins, of the Patrice Chéreau's, the Jerome Robbins, maybe still, they were like the prince, they were the Louis XIV, who when they were directing, they had the seat where normally the prince would watch and see everything perfect. They are now, and they're the geniuses, and they have antagonistic conflicts on stage where something wins at the end, or even if it loses something. And so you really do still represent models. They are no longer contemporary in that big idea of democracy, where it is hard to do. It has to be renegotiated, reinvented, as theater does. But it has to be participatory. And I think this is a fantastic, new, perhaps also a way to look at it, the way you apply Chantal Mouffel's ideas. Do you yourself create work? Have you done games? You created games, or do you see your festival? Is that a big game?
Well, I mean, as a curator, I created situations together with artists where I think certain rules apply, for example. But I think in normal festivals, they are a bit less. I mean, there are rules, as we know. You have to come at time and you buy your ticket and so on. But these are the boring rules. But to play with this game is sometimes it's possible, I guess, also in a curatorial concept. So the one project you mentioned, Truth is Concrete, that we did together with the curatorial team at steirischer Herbst 8 years ago, but now, pretty much exactly now, 8 years ago, which was a big gathering of really hundreds of people from all over the world, artists, activists, theorists, on the relationship between art and politics at that time. It was the time when all the square movements had started. Actually, when we started conceiving this project, it was still before Occupy Wall Street would happen. When we finally did it, Occupy Wall Street was already over, at least at Sakoti Park. So this time, of course, changed quite fast. But the idea was to bring everything together in a certain context and with certain rules. So we wanted to do to capture also this moment of intensity. So it was really a marathon of 170 hours where there was always program. So there was no break. One thing stopped and the other was happening. So it was also during night and so and it had a very rigid. It had, like the rules were also that it was very rigid. If something was supposed to stop at 1 o'clock, it stopped at 1 o'clock, and then the next thing would happen. So there was not much freedom in it. And parallelly to there was a space with completely different rules, where we tried and where it was possible to continue things for hours, to things that we didn't curate or organize, where people could take the space. So it was like both like vertical machine running and horizontal very open space, and two different ways of negotiating rules, for example. So this would be an example where I think also in a curatorial concept, the idea of rules came in, and also obviously not necessarily nice rules. So it was also about making the rules, for example, we as curators that or an artistic organization like steirischer Herbst, that there's of course also hierarchies involved. So we didn't try to hide them in a way. We kind of like rather try to make them very visible and discussable in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think that would be one. So of course also in curatorial concept there can be rules and games dealing with time and space and how you organize people and so on, that can be developed together with artists. So there's also space in the curatorial that goes in the same direction. I think curatorial concepts also can or should to a degree provide agonistic spheres and agonistic spaces. So I wouldn't confuse the role of a curator or programmer with the one of an artist, but I would say they can touch or overlap at moments, or co-create something together in certain situations.
Yeah, but in the idea of a Joseph Beuys and this enlarged idea, of an artist, I think in my view is an artistic, uttering, your festival, your ideas, what you put out. One question I had, I didn't see that this Théâtre de Négociation from Latour and Frédéric Atouitui. Did you see it?
No, I also didn't see. No.
It's an interesting project.
And my French, unfortunately, is very bad. So
yeah. What did you hear? What did you hear about it? And tell us.
Well, I was talking also with them about it, and so I heard a lot of and saw material of it. But I think that the general idea, of course, was, well, they created, to say that this was created as an alternative model to the climate conference of the UN that was happening in Paris at that time. So it was not supposed to explain it or to represent it to a degree as Rimini Protokoll did on the same climate conference, but rather to create a utopian version of it. And of course it was based also on Latour's idea of a parliament of things, that other entities than humans should have a voice in there. But how do you represent a river in a legal or in a parliamentary conversation? How do you represent an animal or a whole landscape or an environment?
They have no lobby.
So it was more. It was basically it was less about the theatrical setup than about taking different models of talking to each other, maybe in a way a little bit like Lotte Vandenberg, to find different ways of really representing interest, trying to represent very different interests also of entities that could not represent their interests for themselves in there, so it was inviting experts and a lot of students and activists from different parts of the world to create a charter. So it also had a goal. It was really about putting something out at the end, a different kind of charter for against the climate catastrophe, or to prevent the climate catastrophe. So it was really very much about creating a utopian version, maybe, or at least a optimistic version of how this conversation should function.
Yeah, and I think also their idea of the kind of the non-human actor that normally even on stages they use it as a political idea, but also use the metaphor of theater or performance, that there are non-human actors like the virus right now, or plants, animals, the critical sphere like 15 meters above the earth and below the earth that allows life. We have to think of it and think that humans are no longer at the center, like that king-like idea. But we also have that we think we are Louis XIV, we are the king of the world because we are humans, especially white or white males like we are, so that no, this is decentralized. There's a variety of forces around us, and we have to be aware if we want to survive, if we want to leave the world as a better place, or with the chance to become a better place. Things really have to change. I also liked, I think you quoted Tanya Bruguera, who also was here on the program, not in this book, but in some other work you said, where she said, the French Revolution was a great gesture of democratizing the arts and life. And we haven't had anything this significant since. She says, why do we still go to the palaces? Why do we go, to the Louvre, where you also, you kind of adore this, the relics of these time, or we go to palaces? She says, no, we should go to the houses of people. We should go inside the lives of people, how and represent that in a way that is reflecting also our society, and in also like in whatever the documentary theater or theater of the real, often these are the quiet stories. They are not the spectacular reality TV shows with extremes. The quietness, that quiet theater movement of Japan, in a way that, even though it's written, but comes out of it, that in the everyday is something very powerful and significant in the life of the people, and not the exceptional one, but the everyday, the normal ones, and what we experience. And I think all these points we talked about together truly point to a new engagement, or to a different engagement. You wrote about the Nature Theater of Oklahoma, to change a little bit, as the Monty Python said, to something completely different, but still it's connected. Where do they fit in this idea of yours?
But on one hand, they fit.
Yeah, just to say, so maybe say a few words about them, so people might not know who they are.
Well, yeah, Nature Theater of Oklahoma is, I think, one of the most interesting theater companies for me since a couple of years. And they, I would say, a New York-based company that very much challenged, I think, a lot of aesthetic conventions in their work. And even so, I would say the audience usually sits in the room and shuts up in their work. I think the way how they are challenged by the work, on stage, creates quite an active participation, at least with the ones that are interested in it. So I think in terms of seeing the theater as itself, the theater space as a site-specific space, and working with that, they're a very good example. I don't have them in the book because I also don't. In a way, I'm also fighting in terms of what I'm fighting, but I think it would be helpful to aim for a strong notion of the political when we talk about political art. So there has been the tendency of saying, well, everything is political, and all theater is political, and so on. I understand the arguments. I just don't think they're very productive. So for me, it's better. So in this book, I really focus on works that also explicitly, also in their content, want to be political and deal with political issues, while Nature Theater of Oklahoma in many ways takes a more poetic approach to that, and also I think creates political situation and also raises political questions in that, but that's not their, let's say, not their main goal. So I rather would separate these spheres a little bit. It's a bit forced to separate them, but for understanding what is happening, it was helpful for me. So actually, they are not even mentioned in the book of political theater, even though they are a very important company for me.
But you say that their formal idea of theater and the participatory offsite aspect of their work, the Nibelungen and the others, is clearly another one. I say it's important, I think, to also give a shout out to them, because it's so hard for them to get produced in New York. Nobody really does it. They're like dogs on the highway, they're in the way, and it's complicated. Meanwhile, there is theater like this that has what I think also Claire Bishop talks about, and you mentioned it, the situationalists. They say they create a situation that points beyond what you just see. It points to the larger picture. And so your book, I think, does that. It points, that's why I like it, to a larger themes we all are wrestling with, especially also in America, where we have to think what are forms we use. And I always like to quote Man Ray, the great American artist. I have seen an exhibition of his early work, and there were paintings. They were landscape paintings. He grew up in Ridgewood, I think, in New Jersey, and they are sublime, I would say. I was so surprised. I couldn't believe my eyes. They were beautiful work of an artist. But Man Ray said, I cannot be an artist who paints landscapes. It's not of our time. It is not the message we have to do. It is not contemporary. It is wrong, as Joseph Beuys said, you know, you want to be an artist and you go in an art store and you buy a canvas and a frame. Maybe that's already the first mistake, you know. And so the question really is, it's not, can you do that? Of course, people can write plays or direct, and they can direct like a Peter Stein, but perhaps work together, ensembles, as you also point out, two teams of duos, trios of directors, companies that are no longer from one country. They are, you know, international. It's hard to say, are they French or German, or often people are chosen by nationality. That also has changed and should change. So I think it is of importance to say this is also next to doing theater. You have to also choose what form, what you said earlier. You know, how do you do that? Is also significant next to, of course, what it is about. So how you choose the form you represent something that is already of significance before you have the first day of rehearsal. And I think we need to be aware of that. And I think your book points out towards that. We're coming closer to the end. So a question would be, the time of Corona, perhaps also the Black Lives Matter movement, but especially also time of Corona. You quote Heiner Müller in it with a quote I think that also fits. Heiner Müller said, what makes theater special is not that you have a live audience, that it happens live. He said what actually is of significance, that potentially the audience member could die or can die, you know, or potentially dying. You know, that's one of the last things she sees in her life. And now we have Corona, which is, you know, an appropriate quote. So, in your thinking, in your research, and I'm sure you did a lot of reading in this time, so is something changing in your mind or in things you read? Do you detect something?
I think it's a bit too early to say. When we talk about theater, I think for me it's rather like that it maybe brings out more clearly what theater can and what it can't do. So I think in the end, theater is a medium, I mean, not very original, but it is a medium that needs a live encounter of people, that needs people coming together. If it becomes digital or streamed online, etc., it changes. It becomes another art form. Might be just as great or whatever, but it loses this. So I think that the scale of theater is human size, even though we might want to bring in other entities, as we said. But I think it's limited in the scale. It's limited in the possibilities. It can negotiate society in this scale. That became, for me, with a lot of experiments, even more clear. And I think so also what is the political potential of it became more clear in it. So that's so in a way, I would say, for me, my view on theater or the possibilities of theater didn't change, but maybe became even more clear in that. And well, stepping a bit out of theater, I think what is maybe, you know, like in the beginning of the lockdowns, there was a lot of talk that capitalism comes to an end now and so on. I mean, this unfortunately was probably not very realistic at any moment, but what it maybe did is also, and which is also important for the theater, it opened some moments of showing that things could be different. So there is an alternative. Suddenly, when health system gets nationalized in some countries, suddenly where everybody says it's impossible, suddenly it's possible from one day to the other. When certain subsidies are suddenly, even in New York, I just had a talk with a friend from New York, said like for the first time in their lives they got subsidies and money from the government to support their. So suddenly, I mean, these are pragmatic examples, but I think also in terms of communalizing certain structures and things and infrastructures, we saw that maybe something else is possible, and this I think we should probably keep, and try to make to use theater also to let this not go, and let this moment not go of saying no, but we just saw that things could be different. Actually, it's possible. Even so you know, it was interesting to see that even some, I would say in Germany, even some neoliberal politicians seem to be quite happy that for a moment politics seem to be a player towards all these big companies and the market and so on again, where they usually are told you don't have anything to say anyway, it's regulated by the market and by the big corporations and companies. Suddenly there was a moment, no, actually there can be something else, and this we should probably try not to let go also in when you think about theater.
Yeah. So for a moment at least, lives matter, and we say we rather shut down all businesses and bars and offices in New York City. So we save lives of people, especially elderly people. I think it is quite something that matters, that it does matter. And this is what also was with Black Lives Matter, that one life lost. It did matter. It did matter, and it created something. I think this is hopeful, and it is important. And yeah, so really, thank you. And I think it's an ongoing contest, what is discussed in theater, but theater itself also, you know, is part of that competition, what it is about. Peter Sondy, the great German writer, who said, you know, what in his theory of theater, it's like a Prometheus. It's for a while it's chained on the rocks, you know, and it's a slave to politics or socialist realism, or it's a slave to capitalism, or a slave to, you know, to the kings and queens, and it yearns to be liberated. And there's that, you know, eagle come and eats his liver, but he ultimately will be in a new form, and there will be a reincarnation till again he will be suffering. But I think this is a moment, perhaps there is a liberation of this Promethean idea, of that promise of theater, that as a representative, imaginary, symbolic way, you know, shows what is great about mankind. And I think what you all wrote about, you know, the new forms of coexisting. What do we really want? What world do we want in the theater? And how can theater be part of the reflection of a world we want to see? And without preaching, you said, without lecturing. And how can we find answers? We are confident that, yes, you know, something can be different. But the big questions, you know, what forms do we need, and what actions politically can we take without having just an attitude, without just pretending to participate? And I think this is a really important, also for every artist and audience members to participate. And so thank you really for taking the time. And I know it's not enough to go in all of it, what you talked about, the immersions or activism, the non-human, or as you also call the post-human theater, what we see, but at least gives us an idea for the idea. And thanks for HowlRound to have us again. I think this is a great forum, and I hope people were listening in today to talk about this. Tomorrow we again have Milo Rao with us, the one Florian talked about. Katja de Geest and Carmen Hornbostel and Milo put together a book on what theater, why is it important now? They talked also, asked for written answers, and they will come. And I think he's just a day before opening the Berlin Schauspiele, the Berlin Schaubühne again. So it's a big honor. We feel that he took time out, and then he goes back to Congo for one of her Congo trials about the Swiss, I think, a steel or mining company where he feels that is creating such great inhuman and unjust actions there, and they got in his symbolic trial, of course, accused for good reasons, and so Milo will be with us, and also I think build on what you say. And I think this is also something, if you have time to listen in tomorrow, as for today, this is will be an important thoughts to listen to. So thank you all for being with us today. And again, Florian, thank you for doing this, for writing that book, for letting us participate in your research and your thoughts of what you have done, like a painter who paints for 6 months or a year. Then you see the pictures, you wrote something, put it down, and now we can participate in your journey. So there's an artistic practice, and I think this is what we can learn for artists in our lives. We have to act like them and listen to them, and also follow their rules, which might not be rules or not rules, but great conversation. Really, really thank you. And to our listeners, thanks for taking the time to listen in. As it was about a book today, perhaps a bit more complex, but I think it's really significant what Florian talks about. And any festivals around, I'm sure he has an email, he's approachable, to curate, to do things. And I hope to also maybe join us in New York. We are trying to create a festival in the summer of 2022, also to really do it in all 5 boroughs with all the CUNY theaters, with New York organizations, but all the work that's happening already in the park is in the very beginning. But I think what you do there is at the very center, what we also might like to do. And so maybe you can join us and help us and advise us and connect us. So this is a great contribution. Thank you. And I hope you will be able, all of you, to listen in tomorrow. And I hope that for also the people who listen, that there's something in there that touched them, that resonated for their own lives or for their own communities, how to reach out, how to create these assemblies, these discussions. And this is really transferable to the world we live in. And that's why, additionally, this is so important. Florian, what you have to say. So stay safe, stay tuned, and goodbye.